Okay, today's talk is called Contradictions in Light Frame of Reference. The main things I will be referring to is this site here. It says video has light has no speed, and it's by Rob Brydon. And this is an example of what I'll be dealing with is people who believe in Einstein's relativity contradicting themselves. So this is what an example is. So Rob Brydon is described here. We go to that site and have a look at him. This is the site. This one, make it larger. Somebody asking who is Rob Brydon, and the best answer they can sort of come up with is Rob Brydon has worked in music, film, television for most of his life. He made his first record at 12 and was host music director of a 1974 CBC TV music series at the age of 20. He has been nominated 9 times in the last 9 years for Canada's prestigious Gemini Awards, 4 times in the category Best Original Music Score for Dramatic Series and 5 times for Best Sound for Dramatic Program. In 1993 he received another Gemini nomination for music on the film Ellie's Lesson, starring Jack Palance. If we go through it, doesn't seem to be saying anything that he's a scientist or anything like that. And he's a published author with a successful science philosophy book about the nature of reality called Imagining the 10th Dimension. And a famous science author, Greg Bear, winner of both the prestigious Nebula and Hugo Awards, had this to say about Rob's book: a fascinating excursion into the multiverse, clear, elegant, personal and provocative. Well-known author and research scientist David J. Brown called Rob's book one of the most brilliantly conceived and mind-stretching books I've ever seen. So he's got this book about physics, and some of these people who are scientists think, well, we know about science, I think it's a good book. So he's actually, I'm not really going to criticise the book, but what I'm criticising, my main concentration is on Einstein's relativity. And of course what he's got to say about Einstein's relativity is a lot of nonsense. So if we find out where this video is, light has no speed, this is the video.
We start with a point.
This is Rob Brydon's video. I'm just going to go through it fully, but you've got to realise that this is a long line of thinking by Rob Brydon, and it's all a lot of nonsense. So it's a chain of thought and it's all nonsense. So here we go, and he's talking about special relativity and so forth, and from that he wants to construct his theory.
Hi everybody, and welcome back once again. I'm Rob Brydon, and this is the Imagining the 10th Dimension video blog. Today's entry is called Light Has No Speed. And I'm going to start out with a quote from theoretical physicist and author Peter Russell. From light's point of view, there is no space, no time, no mass. Light does not exist within the world of space-time and matter. I'm going to provide you with a link to an interesting video featuring Dr. Russell. It's just over an hour long. At about the 46-minute, 25-second mark, he makes a point that I thought was particularly useful for the way it relates to my project. Here's what he says about Einstein's special theory of relativity and the speed of light. All observers experience the speed of light to be the same. The revolutionary thing that came out of this is that space and time are not constant, but vary with the speed of the observer. Space and time are not fixed. So, when a stationary observer observes a ray of light going by, it goes 186,000 miles in 1 second. Somebody moving at 87% of the speed of light, this is just the way the mathematics work out, would see half that amount of distance and half that amount of time. But the speed would still be the same. 93,000 miles in half a second is the same as 186,000 miles in a second. Someone moving at 99.5% the speed of light sees a tenth of that, 18,600 miles in a tenth of a second. It's still the same speed. What Einstein realized is there's something called the space-time continuum, out of which both space and time appear. The space-time continuum is not like space, it's not like time. It's not a mixture of the two, it's something we don't know and can't describe. What we do know is the space and time that it gives rise to, but it never gives rise to the same amounts of space and time. Different observers see differing amounts of space and time, so space and time vary. What Einstein showed is there's something in space-time called the interval. It is like the equivalent of distance or seconds, but the interval is actually the subtraction of the square of space and time. It's actually the square root of that. And that turns out to be constant. So in space-time there is a constant, and the distance in space-time never changes, although what we experience in space and time changes. So this led to some weird things about light. What happens if you travel at 100% of the speed of light? If you look at the way things are going with our equations here, you'll see that light experiences itself traveling no distance in no time. From light's point of view, light does not exist within space-time. For a photon, birth and death are the same moment. Light doesn't experience itself traveling through space and time. There is no non-locality for light because it's one phenomenon within one moment. This is light's point of view. So, the reason for this is that the space-time interval in the space-time continuum for light is always zero. Always zero. So from light's point of view, there's no space, no time, no mass. Light does not exist within the world of space-time and matter. So what do we make of this thing called c, this constant speed? I put speed in quotes deliberately because what we observe as speed, I don't think is speed at all. When I observe a light beam traveling from the back of the room to my eye, in space-time, the beginning and the end of the light beam are the same. Space-time is bent, so they are the same. In my frame of reference, I stretch out that zero interval into space and time, and I always stretch out 186,000 miles of space for every second of time. If I'm traveling very fast, I stretch out a smaller amount. Very slow, I stretch out a much larger amount, and so on. So I don't think c is a speed at all. Rather, it's the constant ratio of the manifestation of space and time. For every 186,000 miles of space that appears, 1 second of time appears. Immanuel Kant was onto this 200 years ago. He said, space and time are the framework within which the mind is constrained to construct its experience of reality. The presentation we looked at here returns us yet again to the important idea that our reality is not continuous, and that when we look up into the sky at night, we are looking back into time. But from the photon's point of view, it took no time whatsoever for it to travel from that distant star to my retina. Isn't that an amazing concept to consider? Next time, we're going to talk about cymatics, gravity, and light. My name's Rob Brydon. Enjoy the journey.
So there you go. It's a long chain of thinking about relativity. He's talking about special relativity, and it leads him to just talk more and more nonsense. It leads him to his theory that the speed of light is not a speed. It's just completely and utter nonsense. Mixed in there with special relativity is his misunderstanding of special relativity, and it just leads him to nonsense. So back to my thing here. So it seems that Rob Brydon is not a scientist, and we looked at his video. Light has no speed. He has now a lot of videos on physics, and it is nonsense. For me, it is nonsense because it's all built on the lie. So if I go back to my thing here, math. nonsense. The lie. This is the lie. This is the lie on which Einstein's relativity is built, and the lie is about the speed of light being constant in vacuum, in inertial frames, free of field effect, and so forth. And it gives you the context of special relativity. And basically, no experiment has actually shown the speed of light are constant, so they've had to define it. So they swap between two different types of theories. But based upon this lie, it has Rob Brydon talking all this nonsense. So given a belief in the lie, he still talks nonsense from the theory that is built upon it. So we go back. From another physics site called Minute Physics thinks Rob Brydon is talking nonsense, and it got a link to that. Why does Minute Physics want to kill 10 dim? This is his, that is sort of his alias on the internet. So, working from a belief in Einstein's relativity, Minute Physics thinks Rob Brydon is talking nonsense about special relativity. So even given a belief in special relativity, there is conflict between people. So this is Rob Brydon in reply to Minute Physics telling everybody that that his site is rubbish. Minute Physics says this video is such rubbish. It's okay up through about that point 2.0 and henceforth becomes increasingly misleading, confused and wrong. It's very visually appealing though, and are very good at getting people to think that it's right. Don't be misled. So this is what Minute Physics is saying about Rob Brydon. If we go back, this video, it's a very impressive video. He has lots of these very impressive videos, and he's basically talking nonsense as far as Minute Physics is concerned. He hasn't got his facts right about relativity. And so bringing it back,
Henry of the popular YouTube channel Minute Physics has recently been making comments trying to get people to stop watching my channel, and since then we've seen hundreds of negative comments suddenly being posted by his followers on my videos. It leads me to ask one simple question. Why?
Right, so there you go. People who believe in special relativity have looked at what Rob Brydon has said about relativity, and they've decided he's just talking nonsense. So even given the fact that most people in special relativity don't realise what they've built upon is a lie, given they believe the lie and hence believing in special relativity, we've got Rob Brydon as an example who is talking about special relativity, and other people who believe in special relativity are saying Rob Brydon is talking a load of nonsense. So they can't even agree among themselves. And he's going to ask the question, why are they criticising me, all these other believers in special relativity? Because he thinks he's talking about it properly, when really he's just talking another brand of nonsense.
Question. Why? Here are 10 reasons that have been posted recently by Henry and his followers on my YouTube channel. Reason number 1, because it's wrong.
That is the correct answer. So basically, even if you believe in special relativity, what Brydon is saying, what Brydon, stumbling a bit here, what Rob Brydon is saying about special relativity is nonsense. Even if you believe in special relativity, what he's saying about special relativity is nonsense. It is wrong. It is wrong. And that's the real reason why they are criticising him, given that belief. But those people who believe in special relativity, they're wrong in their own certain way.
Since I've always said this is a new way of thinking about time and space, and that this is not the explanation for string theory, this is the easiest claim for minute physics to make.
Which is nonsense as well, because in that video I just showed you, he was starting off talking about special relativity before he got to his conclusion that the speed of light is not a speed. That is his conclusion from talking about special relativity. So he's starting off talking about special relativity, and what he's got about special relativity is wrong. So they're not really criticising his theory, which he develops from special relativity. They're criticising what he's saying about special relativity is wrong. So we go back to that. It's wrong.
Claim for minute physics to make. He doesn't agree with this new way of thinking, and as the self-declared spokesman for the world of physics, he feels justified in saying my ideas are not worth discussing.
So this Rob Brydon, he's thinking, oh, I'm being persecuted now. I'm being persecuted. I've come up with this theory, and people are saying they're not going to give me a freedom to say my theory. They're just going to say I'm wrong. And he's feeling persecuted. But what he said about special relativity is nonsense. So he's built a theory up from talking nonsense about special relativity. And so now he's led to feelings of persecuted. Oh, give me my freedom to talk nonsense. Please give me my freedom. Go back.
Discussing. But what does it mean to say something put forth not as a scientific theory, but as a creative way to visualize the 10 spatial or space-like dimensions?
Yeah, but he's talked about special relativity and it's nonsense.
Theorists have told us our reality is derived from is wrong. If I show you an image of a bowling ball on a rubber sheet and say, this is a way of thinking about gravity, would your response be, there are no bowling balls and rubber sheets in space, so that visualization is worthless?
So he's just talking nonsense now. He's talking rubbish about this representation, and he's just gone off the rails. In science, a physical picture is often more important than mathematics used to describe it. By that's Kaku and I disagree with that. The maths has to be correct, and they've actually allowed the maths to be messed up. I think people like him probably have done that. They've allowed maths to become really messed up mess. And if they can do a quick little picture and they say this is it, and it's false representation, they've got maths which is messed up and they're falsely then representing it by a pictorial thing.
Worthless? Sometimes a picture conveys an idea quite well without requiring people to understand the calculations that make the idea correct. And if I draw you some pictures that give you a way of visualizing 10 spatial dimensions, each one orthogonal to the next, then I've introduced you to an idea you might want to learn more about. Isn't that a good thing?
Well, that might be a good thing, but we've actually started from talking about special relativity to go on to this what you call the 10th dimension and your pictorial way of doing things, and what you're talking about is nonsense. From the point of view of people who believe in special relativity, you're just talking nonsense. So you're built from nonsense. Here we go. So it's saying click here to watch the video Minute Physics, and it says it's increasingly wrong about what he's talking about imagining the 10th dimension, and a blanket statement like this, like his, are dangerously misleading. So Minute Physics is saying he's dangerously misleading in what he's saying about special relativity. For instance, a few months ago a Wikipedia moderator completely deleted the article on the point line postulate, commenting that they did so because Rob Brydon talks about it in his videos and Rob's videos are wrong. So people are saying he's wrong. Likewise, for years the Wikipedia article on retrocausality has said this about antimatter. The backwards in time point of view is nowadays accepted as completely equivalent to other pictures, but this is another of the constants I talk about in the video, which some keep saying is just a crazy idea I made up. How long until that phrase is now removed from Wikipedia? I think that's what he's saying. a new way of thinking about time and space. So that's what he's trying to advocate, a new way of talking about time and space, but he's talked about it from talking nonsense about special relativity, and so he's getting deleted, and people are saying he's talking nonsense, and he's now feeling persecuted about it. So that's that. So where we go back to my article, right? So that's what that is rough. What is minute physics? Minute physics thinks about Rob Brydon, what he thinks about it. They think he's talking nonsense, and you can go to Minute Physics and they'll probably give you more details. Right, his defence to them basically is that he's trying to propose a new theory, but in the video clip light has no speed, he is definitely claimed to be talking about special relativity, and only the bit of light has no speed is supposed to be a new bit. So he's building up from special relativity to his idea that the speed of light is not a speed. From his beliefs in special relativity, it leads him to believe the nonsense, light has no speed. So that's what it's led him to. He believes light has no speed. That's his theory, light has no speed, but he's built up from it for special relativity. And what he's saying about special relativity is nonsense. So let's get to the bit where things go wrong. I want to go back to his video where light has no speed. Get back to his video, and we'll watch it, and we'll stop at the point where he just goes off the rails.
We start with a point. Hi everybody, and welcome back once again. I'm Rob Brydon, and this is the Imagining the 10th Dimension video blog. Today's entry is called Light Has No Speed. And I'm going to start out with a quote from theoretical physicist and author Peter Russell. From light's point of view, there is no space, no time, no mass. Light does not exist within the world of space-time and matter. I'm going to provide...
Right, that's it. So he's not a smiling little face, and he's quoting somebody. This is presumably a physicist. He's quoting what this person has said. So this is what he's building upon. And so if he's wrong, he's been building upon what this person has been telling him. So this is all a process of building, a building process of nonsense. I go back. So that's where it goes wrong. And now look at a video by Richard Wolfson explaining relativity, and his bio is that place there, the bio. So I'll show you the bio of Wolfson. If I still got, yes, this is the bio of Richard Wolfson, and he's a professor of physics, and he teaches things like relativity, and he's in Middlebury College. And I've got a talk here about how he's explaining relativity. So if we go back, that's my next point, and the video where he's explaining it is there. Right. So this video is why Brian Cox was wrong, and what they're picking up in this video is Brian Cox makes a little brief comment about relativity, and this person, who's calling himself Anon Hotmar, is pointing out Brian Cox is wrong. But actually we could be a bit of leeway and say that what Brian Cox is really very loose talking about relativity. It's not precisely accurate, but it's loose talking about relativity. So Anon Hotmar is making a point that Brian Cox is wrong, but really we could give him a little leeway, and it's very loose talking. So we'll pick up first by what Brian Cox says about relativity. Here we go.
You can see then why actually moving clocks run slowly.
Right, that was it. So Brian Cox is saying moving clocks run slowly, and the next point of this video talk by Wolfson is to point out that that is actually a bad way to talk about things. So if we carry on now, this is Professor Wolfson who's going to explain that you shouldn't talk about things that way.
I'm going to also ask you to watch your language. And this is a plea not only to you in my audience, but also to some of my fellow teachers of relativity, because it's very easy to make statements that violate the spirit of the relativity principle.
So it's very easy to say things that violate special relativity. So based upon a belief in special relativity, and Professor Wolfson and Professor Brian Cox, they both believe in special relativity, but it's very easy to say something which is wrong or violates what they believe. And so this is basically what has happened here with Brian Cox. Brian Cox is talking about special relativity, he believes it, and he's actually saying something which violates what they believe.
You can see then why actually moving clocks run slowly.
So that violates what they believe. And Professor Wolfson is now going to point out that you shouldn't really talk about things that way.
I'm going to also ask you to watch your language. And this is a plea not only to you in my audience, but also to some of my fellow teachers of relativity, because it's very easy to make statements that violate the spirit of the relativity principle. You've heard about political correctness on our campuses. You have to make statements that are in tune with the prevailing political norms. Well, I don't want to get into that. But I do want to ask you, and ask myself, and ask my fellow teachers of relativity to be relativistically correct in our language. And what that means is, when you're describing what happens to space and time, be very careful to avoid any statements that might suggest there is a preferred frame of reference, a preferred state of motion. Why? Because there isn't a preferred frame of reference, and there isn't a preferred state of motion. The Copernican Principle has been expanded through special relativity to say that all uniformly moving frames of reference are equally valid places, situations to do physics. So avoid any statements that would suggest anything to the contrary. For example, in the last lecture when we put you in first the car, then the airplane, and then the spaceship, and we said, well, we both measure the same speed for light. We said, how could that possibly be? And I simply hinted at the end of the lecture that it must mean that something is different about our measures of space and time. You might jump to the conclusion that, well, maybe the meter stick in the moving vehicle shrinks. Maybe something funny happens to the clock in the moving vehicle because the vehicle is moving. That's sort of the philosophy that Lorentz and Fitzgerald had.
So there you go. He's pointing out the problem there, and basically saying a statement like moving clock runs slow is a bad thing to say if you believe in Einstein's special relativity. Right, there we get onto it. Going into more detail here, if you can pick it up here. Here we go. He's going to go into more detail.
Say moving clocks run slow.
Yeah.
There's two things wrong with that. It's probably grammatically incorrect. It should say slowly. But much more profoundly, it's simply not relativistically correct. And I'd like you to pause right now, turn off your VCR, turn off your cassette player for just a minute, and think about what is wrong with the statement, moving clocks run slow. Why is that statement not relativistically correct? Think about that for a few minutes. When you're done thinking about it, start up again and we'll continue. So what's wrong with the statement, moving clocks run slow? It implies there's something special about motion, special about movement, that there's somebody who's not moving, for whom the clock is right and doesn't run slow, and somebody else for whom, because they're moving, the clock runs slow. Nonsense. Nobody can say...
There you go. The word nonsense is quite relevant there. So moving clocks run slow, and from his belief in special relativity, you can talk nonsense.
Something special about motion, special about movement, that there's somebody who's not moving, for whom the clock is right and doesn't run slow, and somebody else for whom, because they're moving, the clock runs slow. Nonsense. Nobody can say, I'm moving and you're not, or you're moving and I'm not. That's the whole point of relativity. Moving clocks run slow is an absurd statement.
So moving clocks run slow is an absurd statement, and that was what Brian Cox has said. It's bad. If you're believing in special relativity, it is a bad thing to say.
It's nevertheless used very commonly, including in physics books or books for non-science people about relativity, to describe this phenomenon of time dilation.
So we've got all these books on special relativity, and they're saying, telling you moving clocks run slow, and he's saying these books are bad.
One problem with the idea of moving clocks run slow is you might imagine yourself in a spacecraft whizzing past Earth with a clock. That's a moving clock, right? And the moving clock runs slow. So you might imagine, in your frame of reference, everything seems to have slowed down. You watch the hands of your clock creeping slowly, having a heartbeat slow. Nonsense. That frame of reference...
Whereas there is nonsense. So you can imagine yourself in a spaceship going at a fast speed, and people will then say from special relativity that your clock is running slow. In actual fact, when you as the astronaut in that spaceship, you are not experiencing that, and that's from the belief in special relativity, which has been talked about by this Professor Wolfson. So people were saying, "Oh, time is slowing down." They're just talking nonsense. It's a bad way of talking about things.
The hands of your clock creeping slowly, having a heartbeat slow. Nonsense. That frame of reference is just as good a frame of reference for doing physics in as any other frame of reference. Things have to seem perfectly normal in that frame of reference. If they didn't seem perfectly normal in that frame of reference, physics would be somehow different there. And the whole point of relativity is the laws that govern physical reality don't depend on your state of motion. They're the same for all observers in uniform motion. Things can't seem strange. Even if you're in a spacecraft whizzing along at 0.99999 the speed of light, everything in the context of that spacecraft, in your frame of reference, your heartbeat, your aging, all that seems perfectly normal. Time for you may be running differently than it does on Earth. We'll get to that in the next lecture.
So you're going close to the speed of light, and time for you in your spaceship is not, you're not going to notice anything different. So that is the point he's making, and that's based upon their belief in special relativity. So if we go back to Rob Brydon, go back to Rob Brydon here, pick him up again, what he's talking about.
Start out with a quote from theoretical physicist and author Peter Russell. From light's point of view, there is no space, no time, no mass. Light does not exist within the world.
So what we're talking about here is Russell is talking about a frame of reference from the light's point of view, and as explained in the last talk here, and so as explained by him, you travel at a very fast speed and you're not going to experience time slowing down in your frame of reference. People outside may be thinking your clock is slowing down, but for you travelling at that speed, you're not going to experience time slowing down. So in that frame you are going to experience things normally. So this is where the problem happens. If you're suddenly going at light speed, why should time suddenly stop? Why if you're in a frame of reference travelling near the speed of light, you're not going to say you're not going to experience time stopping in your frame, but suddenly they talk about speed. If you could go at the speed of light, why would you suddenly say, yeah, time is stopped for you? So that is the nonsense bit. Everything, the faster you go in your frame of reference, you're not going to experience time stopping, but they're suddenly saying if you are going at light speed, then time is stopped, which is nonsense. And this is where they picked the idea up from. If it were possible to go at light speed, then you, according to relativity, of special relativity, you would not be having time stopped. But suddenly people like this are saying that you are, and this person here suddenly believed what he said, which is contrary to what Professor Wolfson is saying.
Of space, time, and matter. I'm going to provide you with a link to an interesting video featuring Dr. Russell. It's just over an hour long. At about the 46-minute, 25-second mark, he makes a point that I thought was particularly useful for the way it relates to my project. Here's what he says about Einstein's special theory of relativity and the speed of light. All observers experience the speed of light to be the same. The revolutionary thing that came out of this is that space and time are not...
So, all observers experience the speed of light to be the same. Let me pick that up again.
The revolutionary thing that came out of this is that space and time are not constant, but vary with the speed of the observer.
I should have gone back a bit further. So, Einstein's special theory of relativity, the speed of light is absolute, the same for all observers regardless of their speed. So, you as an observer, say you were able actually to go at the speed of light, then you were trying to make a measurement of the speed of light, then you would still be getting the same value for the speed of light, because the speed of light is supposed to be absolute. And if you're doing that, then surely you are measuring time. Time is not stopped.
The revolutionary thing that came out of this is that space and time are not constant, but vary with the speed of the observer. Space and time are not fixed. So, when a stationary observer observes a ray of light going by, it goes 186,000 miles in 1 second. Somebody moving at 87% of the speed of light, this is just the way the mathematics work out, would see half that amount of distance and half that amount of time. But the speed would
see how he's just falling off the rails here. He's if we go back to him, so he was pointing out, no matter what speed you're going at, you are not noticing a difference in your clock. You're not suddenly feeling time slowing down. You're experiencing time in the normal way. So he's saying half this time. So when we go back, so he's sort of getting muddled up now. Pick it up again.
Would see half that amount of distance.
We'll see half that amount of distance, and what do you say?
Would see half that amount of distance and half that amount of time.
So he's thinking half that amount of time. So he's getting muddled up by it. He's that very loose statement of the moving clocks have run slow. He's suddenly thinking time is slowing down for the person who's moving, and that is what Wolfson has pointed out is wrong.
But the speed would still be the same. 93,000 miles in half a second is the same as 186,000 miles in a second. Someone moving at 99.5% the speed of light sees a tenth of that, 18,600 miles in a tenth of a second. It's still the same speed. What Einstein realized is there's something called the space-time continuum, out of which both space and time appear. The space-time continuum is not like space, it's not like time. It's not a mixture of the two, it's something we don't know and can't describe.
Something we don't know and can't describe. It's sort of like, well, just talking nonsense, absolute nonsense. When I go back to that, this is the lie upon which Einstein's relativity is built, and the lie about the speed of light. And so if you are believing the lie, then what you've got to do is you've got to mess up time and space measurements. So that's the knock-on effect of it. And so then you end up with the space-time continuum. And so that's what you've got there. But suddenly he's bringing it to a new level of nonsense, talking about you don't know what space-time is. And get back to it.
It's not a mixture of the two. It's something we don't know and can't describe.
It's something we don't know and can't describe. It's just going more and more nonsense. He's sort of like building upon this nonsense about moving clocks run slow, which Professor Wolfson has pointed out is a bad thing to say. He's building upon it. He's completely misunderstood special relativity, and he's now talking nonsense. And he's getting to the point of saying space-time is something you can't understand or describe. It's just more and more layers and layers of it. This is his understanding of special relativity. We go through his chain of thinking, and it's just nonsense.
Don't know and can't describe. What we do know is the space and time that it gives rise to, but it never gives rise to the same amounts of space and time. Different observers see differing amounts of space and time, so space and time vary.
Yeah, that's the space and time vary. That's a consequence of building up upon the idea that the speed of light is constant. So, different amounts. Yeah, back to that again.
What Einstein showed is there's something in space-time called the interval. It is like the equivalent of distance or seconds, but the interval is actually the subtraction of the square of space and time. It's actually the square root of that. And that turns out to be constant.
So this is building to the maths of which Einstein is using for his relativity, and special relativity and all this so forth is using some things like that, and it's getting messed up. It's really, when you're actually looking into what they're doing with this math, it's really messed up. If I go back, mathematical nonsense. This is a video. This is an example of the mess they do when they do the maths. When they do the maths, they just do nonsense. So he's there introducing the maths, and what they there you go. He's introducing the maths, and what they actually do with this maths is just nonsense.
And that turns actually the square root of that. And that turns out to be constant. So in space-time there is a constant, and the distance in space-time never changes, although what we experience in space and time changes. So this led to some weird things about light.
It led to some weird things because they're just messing around with the maths, and they're really making things into a terrible mess. They're starting from a lie, and they're really messing the maths up. So, but that's the way that these people who believe in special relativity go with their starting point.
To some weird things about light. What happens if you travel at 100% of the speed of light? If you look at the way things are going with our equations here, you'll see that light experiences itself traveling no distance in no time.
Which is nonsense. Even from people who believe in special relativity, they don't believe in that sort of thing. If they're people like Professor Wolfson, where's he gone? Yeah, Professor Wolfson. Here we go. So he's pointing out that's not right. You've got a problem. Can you actually accelerate to the speed of light? But if you are at the speed of light, then based upon what's happening at speeds less than the speed of light, time is not slowed down for you. So he's suddenly thinking time has stopped when you're travelling at the speed of light, and that's just nonsense, because you don't get that at speeds below the speed of light. So why should you get it at the speed of light? And suddenly you are violating special relativity when you're saying that, the principle of special relativity, where you're not supposed to get something like that.
From light's point of view, light does not exist within space-time. For a photon, birth and death are the same moment.
Nonsense. He's just gone nonsense now. He's just not understanding.
Light doesn't experience itself traveling through space and time. There is no non-locality for light because it's one phenomenon within one moment. This is light's point of view. So
light's point of view, he's just turned it up into nonsense now. He's not recognised that as you're getting nearer the speed of light, your clock is not slowing down for you in your frame of reference. And he's suddenly gone completely off the rails.
the reason for this is that the space-time interval in the space-time continuum for light is always zero. Always zero.
Always zero. It's just complete nonsense.
So from light's point of view, there's no space, no time.
No space, no time. Nonsense, nonsense, nonsense.
No mass. Light does not exist within the world of space-time and mass.
And light does not exist in whatever space and time. It's just nonsense. It's completely off the rails.
So what do we make of this thing called C? this constant speed. I put
So what we're starting from is we're defining c as a speed of light, and it is well, really, you shouldn't really be defining a speed of light. You should actually be measuring it. But c is the speed of light, and what they measure it as is approximately 186,000 miles per second. But we definitely know it is supposed to be a speed, but suddenly he's going off the rails.
speed in quotes deliberately, because what we observe as speed, I don't think is speed at all.
Oh, there you go. What we observe is speed, I don't think is speed. So he's gone completely off the rails now. We are observing light moving a certain distance in a certain amount of time, and that's what we mean by speed. And now suddenly he's gone off the rails, and he doesn't even recognise speed of light as being c, he doesn't suddenly doesn't recognise that a speed of light is a speed. He's suddenly completely gone off the rails. It's just utter nonsense.
When I observe a light beam traveling from the back of the room to my eye, in space-time the beginning and the end of the light beam are the same. Space-time is bent, so they are the same.
So page 9 event, this is more nonsense. This is he hasn't understood the basic idea of frames of reference. He's just gone off the rails. He's trying to build now upon all his misunderstandings, and he's trying to bring in other things.
Frame of reference, I stretch out that zero interval into space and time, and I always stretch out 186,000 miles of space for every second of time. If I'm traveling very fast, I stretch out a smaller amount. Very slow, I stretch out a much larger amount, and so on. So I don't think c is a speed at all.
Doesn't think c is a speed at all. Even though we're talking about c as a speed, he's suddenly having a big insight saying c is not a speed, so he's completely bonkers.
Rather, it's the constant ratio of the manifestation of space and time. For every 186,000 miles of
So what is speed supposed to be? It's supposed to be a certain distance you travel in a certain amount of time. And now he's suddenly playing around with words here. What are you going, what are you talking about now? It's a unit of 186,000 miles for one unit of time. What? We're supposed to be calling that speed, you idiot.
space that appears, 1 second of time appears. Immanuel Kant was onto this 200 years ago. He said, space and time are the framework within which the mind is constrained to construct its experience of reality.
So, this is a good philosopher, and he's now trying to quote him as backing up his idea that a speed of light is not the speed. Sort of like, he's crazy. He's gone off the rails. Crazy.
The presentation we looked at here returns us yet again to the important idea that our reality is not continuous, and that when we look up into the sky at night, we are looking back into time. But from the photon's point of view, it took no time whatsoever for it to travel from that distant star to my retina. Isn't that an amazing concept to consider?
What's really amazing is how all these people can get deluded, and he's smiling about it. He's into his delusions. He's happy. I understand something, and he's gone off completely into delusions.
Next time, we're going to talk about cymatics, gravity, and light.
So, happy, smiling away, completely deluded about special relativity. Professor Wolfson wouldn't agree with him what he's saying about special relativity, and minute physics doesn't agree with him what he's saying about special relativity, and other people don't agree with what he's saying about special relativity, and these are the people who believe in special relativity. But he's happy. He suddenly made this amazing insight, and he's gone off the rails and thinking speed is not speed. It's just a long chain of thinking, and you're ending up with more and more nonsense. So if we go back to beginning a bit. Here we go.
Hi everybody, and welcome
Back to beginning.
once again. I'm Rob Brydon, and this is the Imagining the 10th Dimension video blog. Today's entry is called Light Has No Speed.
Light has no speed. So he's stating his conclusion, and it's nonsense. It's built upon nonsense.
And I'm going to start out with a quote from theoretical physicist and author Peter Russell. From light's point of view, there is no space.
Right, so this is what he's going by. This is going by this person. So whether this person, Peter Russell, knows what he's talking about, we don't know. But we've got people disagreeing about this version of special relativity. So if this is accurate from Peter Russell, from light's point of view, there is no space, no time, no mass. Light does not exist within the world of space, time and matter. So is Peter Russell saying this correctly, or or does it need to be said better than that? But anyway, this person has believed it, and he's built a load of nonsense up about it. It just contradicts what other people have said about special relativity. So we go back to Richard. So it's Richard Wolfson. We go back to that one. Yeah, this one here. This is the log here. We go back to what Brian Cox is saying.
You can see then why actually moving clocks run slowly.
So that's loose talk from Brian Cox, Professor Brian Cox, saying moving clocks run slowly. But as this Professor Wolfson points out, that is a very bad way of talking about things. So if we grant that is what it also points out, all this is in a lot of relativity books. We grant all this, and we go to this person. Get back to his picture. Here we go. Go to this person. He seems to have understood these relativity books, which have told him moving clocks run slow, and so he suddenly thought, well, if you move at the speed of light, then therefore time must stop, and that's what his thinking process has been. He's sort of like, well, that's nonsense. He's sort of like, from a bad statement of relativity, he's created a faulty conclusion. So Professor Wolfson's pointing out, saying moving clocks run slow is a bad thing to say, but this person sadly has built up all his theorising upon a bad statement. So this is how we get the conflict in special relativity, where they will teach relativity to you, and it completely is a bad way of talking about it. Is what Richard Wolfson would point out, as you've got to be relatively correct in the words you use, and you must be careful that you say things correctly, or else you are leading to a false impression. So that's what we got. So even if you believe in special relativity, you can end up saying things that are wrong, and you can lead people into the completely wrong direction. So what we got then? We've got Rob Brydon and Richard Wolfson are in conflict over their understanding of Einstein's relativity, and this sort of thing happens all the time. One believer will say one thing, and another believer will say the opposite. Many believers in Einstein's relativity have said similar to Rob Brydon, and Einstein's relativity is to a large extent protected by its believers, talking contradictory nonsense. So that's basically the conclusion. From Richard Wolfson's point of view, Rob Brydon has gone with a bad way of talking about special relativity, and it's led him to false conclusions about relativity. And Rob Brydon is now thinking he's a genius, that he's found out that the speed of light is not a speed. He's sort of like gone off complete nonsense. And Richard Wolfson is sort of like pointing out, you've got to be careful of what you say in special relativity, and that even lots of special relativity books are wrong. So Rob Brydon has gone off on the wrong track based on bad teaching as far as Richard Wolfson is concerned. But you've got all this conflict in special relativity and in general relativity of different people saying different things, which is in conflict. So Einstein's relativity is to a large extent protected by its believers, talking contradictory nonsense. So go back. They're talking mathematical nonsense, pointed out by this video, and they're building upon a lie. They build upon a lie that they've measured the speed of light as constant in inertial frames, free of fields of influence and in a vacuum. They are making a lie that that's what they've done, and I've got people who will point out that that is a lie. You've got a person here, Dr. Brian Wallace, who's pointing out the farce of physics. He's actually he's talking here about his adventures as trying to get his evidence published that the speed of light is not constant, and so he's gone into adventures. What you happen with peer-reviewed journals is that they don't really want to believe that the speed of light is not constant. And if I find out the relevant quote here, so Einstein's special relativity theory, with his second postulate that the speed of light in space is constant, is the linchpin that holds whole range of modern physics theories together. Shatter this postulate and modern physics becomes an absolute farce. So they've built upon a farce, really. That this lie, they have to protect it now. They've got to protect that lie. But given that lie, the next thing they do is they talk nonsense. And that sort of nonsense is, as I pointed out to you, that they say things wrong. Based upon that lie, they are saying things wrong. And it's leading them all into conflict. If they believe in Einstein's relativity, they talk nonsense. They contradict each other. Einstein's relativity is to a large extent protected by its believers talking contradictory nonsense. You've got Rob Brydon saying one thing about special relativity, and you've got Richard Wilson saying something else, and you've got other people saying other things. So it's just nonsense all the way down. Thank you. That's the end.